The chandeliers at the Ellsworth Hotel burned like frozen suns, and Amaris Beaumont stood beneath them alone, her champagne flute trembling so violently that a single amber drop rolled down her wrist and disappeared into the seam of her borrowed silk glove. 300 guests. 6 of them had looked her in the eye. None of them had spoken her name. She had rehearsed the walk in her bathroom mirror for 2 weeks, chin lifted, shoulders down, smile soft, not desperate. She had practiced saying, "I'm Amaris Denton's wife," until the syllables stopped tasting like ash. Then, 40 minutes into the Beaumont Foundation Gala, the one she had planned, catered, and personally handwritten 280 invitations for, her husband had leaned close to her ear on the ballroom floor and whispered, "Baby, do me a favor. Stand by the pillar. You're throwing off the photos." He had walked away, and the crowd, sensing weakness the way sharks sense blood, had closed around him and swallowed him whole. Eleonora Voss, his junior partner, had laughed too hard at something he said, and touched the small of his back like she owned the map to it. Amaris stared at the pillar, at her own reflection in the mirrored panel beside it, 29 years old, hair pinned in a careful chignon, a woman in a $500 dress who had just been told she was the ugly part of her own life. Then a hand slid into hers, warm, steady, unfamiliar. A man's hand, the knuckles marked by a thin white scar shaped like a crescent moon. She turned her head slowly. The ballroom went quiet in patches, the way water freezes, from the edges inward. 200 faces angled toward the pillar, toward her, toward the man beside her, in a midnight black suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. Denton, from across the room, dropped his glass. But to understand how Amaris ended up here, hand in hand with the most feared man in Chicago, we need to go back. This story is for every woman who has ever made herself smaller, so the man beside her could feel taller, for every woman who confused being needed with being loved, for every woman who has planned the party, worn the dress, smiled through the photo, and then been asked to please move out of the frame. You know that quiet moment when you realize your marriage has been a stage, and you've been the crew, not the star. That's where Amaris was standing when a stranger took her hand. And the question this whole story is going to ask you, the one I want you to hold on to until the very end, is this. What is the price of being chosen if the man doing the choosing owns half the shadows in the city? Before we go further, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button, and in the comments, tell me, what city are you watching from? I want to know who's riding with Amaris tonight. 20 months before the gala, Amaris Beaumont had believed she was living a life she'd earned. She had grown up in Gary, Indiana, in a 2-bedroom rental where her mother, Odessa, worked doubles at a nursing home and still made time to iron Amaris's uniform every Sunday night. Odessa used to press the collar flat with her palm before the iron ever touched it, murmuring, "Baby, the world is going to try to wrinkle you. Don't help it." Amaris had carried those words with her to Northwestern on a partial scholarship, into a marketing degree paid for in equal parts by grants and third-shift stocking at a Meyer off Ridge Road. She met Denton Beaumont at a nonprofit fundraiser in Chicago, the fall she turned 25. He was 34, sharp-jawed, the youngest partner at Marlock and Hess, a boutique corporate law firm whose clients had last names that appeared on hospital wings. He had watched her present a pitch deck on donor retention, with the kind of attention that made her lose her place twice. Afterward, he asked if she'd let him buy her a bad glass of wine. She said yes, and 6 months later she was wearing a 2-carat oval on her left hand. The Beaumonts, his family, were old Chicago money, the kind that had a pew at Fourth Presbyterian and a bronze plaque in the lobby of a museum. His mother, Vivian, had called Amaris dear the way other women said unfortunately. His father, Harlan, had asked at their engagement dinner whether Amaris's people were from Gary, or just ended up there, and had smiled at his own joke while Denton studied his soup. Amaris had told herself she could soften them. She was good at softening people. She quit her marketing job at a mid-tier agency 6 months after the wedding, because Denton said his schedule needed a partner, not a colleague. She started the Beaumont Foundation from a spare bedroom, wrote its mission statement in one long Saturday, and by their second anniversary had raised $2.4 million for early literacy programs on the South Side. Every press release said founded by Denton Beaumont. She had drafted every one of them. She stopped noticing the pattern the way you stop noticing wallpaper. She noticed the smaller things. How Denton would introduce her at events as my wife without her name attached, as if the name was a detail he'd misplaced. How Vivian sent Eleanor Voss, Denton's 27-year-old junior associate, all sleek bob and Wharton pedigree, the family Christmas card that year, and had forgotten to include Amaris in the address. How Denton had started coming home at 11 with the smell of a perfume that wasn't hers on the shoulder of his suit jacket, and how, when she'd asked once gently, he had looked at her with real hurt in his eyes and said, "Amaris, please, don't make me feel small in my own house." She had apologized. She had made him breakfast the next morning. She had believed the lie every quiet, disappearing woman has believed since the beginning of time. If I love him harder, he will remember he chose me. By the week of the gala, she was 32 pounds lighter than she'd been on her wedding day. She was averaging 4 hours of sleep. She had personally negotiated the venue price down 18%, had picked the centerpiece colors to match Denton's tie, and had cried once in the walk-in pantry when the caterer asked whose vision the evening was. She had said, "His. It's all his." And on the night the ballroom filled with 300 people who had come because of her work and refused to look at her, she had finally, quietly, stopped believing herself. That was the woman standing at the pillar when the hand touched hers. His voice reached her before she'd finished turning her head. "Don't look at him. Look at me." The words were low, unhurried, threaded with an accent that lived somewhere between Seoul and the south side of Chicago. A man who had learned English in 2 places at once. Amaris let her eyes lift. He was maybe 36. Not tall in the way men bragged about, but built like a door, solid through the shoulders, quiet through the hands. Ink-black hair combed back from a widow's peak. A jaw that looked like it had been set by a decision, not a bone. His suit was so black it drank the chandelier light. The only color on him was the deep red of a silk pocket square and the warm brown of his eyes, which were watching her with a focus she hadn't felt directed at her in 3 years. "Breathe," he said. "In through your nose. You're about to faint, and I don't feel like carrying you." She almost laughed. It came out as a sound closer to a sob. She breathed. "Better," he murmured. "Now. Smile like I just told you something extremely boring about the stock market." She did. It felt like using a muscle she'd forgotten she had. "Good," he said. "The photographers can leave now." Cameras clicked. Somewhere across the room, Vivian Beaumont's face was doing something complicated. Eleanor Voss had gone very still, one hand frozen on Denton's forearm. "Who are you?" Amaris asked quietly, still smiling for the room. "Kaeson Rhee." He said his name like handing over a business card that had no phone number on it. "We haven't met, but I know your husband, and I know what your husband has done." Something cold moved down her spine. "I don't understand," she said. "You will." His thumb brushed once across the back of her hand, an anchor, not a flirtation. "In about 90 seconds, a man named Percival is going to walk over here and pretend to introduce us. You are going to laugh. You are going to hand him my glass. Then you are going to let me walk you out onto the terrace, because you need air, and everyone in this room needs to see that a stranger noticed what your husband didn't." "Why?" she whispered. His eyes softened barely. "Because I have watched him do this to you at 4 different events this year, Mrs. Beaumont, and because tonight, for reasons that have nothing to do with kindness, I have decided that this is the last one." Her pulse thudded against the pearl choker at her throat. "I don't take handouts from strange men," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice came out. "I'm not offering one." A beat. "I'm offering an introduction. What you do with it is entirely yours." Percival appeared, as promised, a silver-haired man with a bourbon in one hand and a laugh already loaded. Kaeson greeted him warmly. Amaris laughed on cue. She passed off the glass. She walked on Kaeson's arm, out through the tall French doors onto the terrace overlooking Michigan Avenue, and did not look back at the pillar or the man who had put her there. Behind her, she could feel Denton Beaumont's eyes burning a hole in the space between her shoulder blades. She had no idea yet that Kaeson Rhee was the man half the city had a rumor about. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years, someone had walked into a room and seen her before he saw anyone else. The terrace air was cold enough to sting. Amaris took a breath so deep her ribs hurt. "You're shaking," Kaeson said. He did not touch her again. "I'm fine." "You're not." He leaned on the stone railing beside her, looking out at the river of headlights below. "But you will be. May I be direct, Mrs. Beaumont?" "Amaris." "Amaris." He said it like it was an object he was setting down carefully. "Your husband has been laundering money through the Beaumont Foundation for the last 14 months. The city lights blurred. "That's not—" she started. "2.4 million in donations." He recited it without looking at her. Approximately 600,000 of it never touched a literacy program. It moved through a shell nonprofit in Delaware called Halston Educational Trust, then into a real estate holding company in Gary, owned by a woman named Eleonora Voss's uncle. From there, it bought a warehouse that has been used, for the last 8 months, to store product for a distributor my organization has been quietly trying to remove from this city." "Product," Amaris repeated. Her mouth had gone dry. "Fentanyl-cut heroin, primarily distributed in the same Southside zip codes your foundation claims to serve." She gripped the stone railing hard enough that her knuckles ached. "You're lying!" "I have the wire transfer records, the shell company filings, and 2 audio recordings of your husband on a call with a man named Boaz Whitmer, who is currently under federal indictment in the Northern District of Illinois." His voice was still gentle. "I brought them tonight, in a folder. I was prepared to hand them to you at the pillar. Then I saw your face when he walked away, and I decided the folder could wait until you had eaten something and remembered your own name." Amaris made a sound. It wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't quite anything. "Who are you?" she asked. Kaeson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, he chose the words with a surgeon's care. "My family's name is Rhee. We came from Busan to Chicago in 1978. My grandfather started with a laundromat on Lawrence Avenue. My father built what came after. I inherited it 8 years ago." His mouth moved into something that was not a smile. "There are people in this city who would tell you I am the reason certain streets are safer than they were a decade ago. There are people who would tell you I am the reason certain other streets are more dangerous. Both are true. I do not lie to women about who I am." "You're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I run what my father ran." "Yes." The Chicago wind moved the loose curl at her temple. "Then why help me?" He looked at her fully for the first time since they'd stepped outside. His eyes were tired, in a way she recognized. The tired of someone who had run out of easy answers a long time ago. "Because your husband used a foundation with a black woman's face on it to move poison into neighborhoods that look like the one my grandmother lived in when she cleaned houses in Bronzeville. Because if I take him down without you, he takes you down with him. The state's attorney will not care that you signed papers you didn't read. They will care that you signed them." Amaris felt the ground of her life tilt sideways. "I'm going to jail," she whispered. "No," Kaeson Rhee said. "Not if we do this correctly." He drove her home himself, not in a limo, in a matte charcoal sedan that smelled faintly of leather and eucalyptus, with a driver named Yunzo, who did not look at her once in the rearview mirror. Kaeson sat across from her in the back, a slim leather folder resting on his knee. They pulled up not to the Beaumont brownstone in Lincoln Park, but to a quiet 3-story building on West Erie Street. He walked her up a flight of interior stairs, into an apartment that was all clean lines and warm oak, and set her down in a kitchen chair. He made her tea, real tea boiled from a kettle, not a bag ripped open one-handed. He set a plate of sliced Asian pear in front of her and said, "Eat, then we talk." She ate 3 slices before her hands stopped shaking. "Here is what I am offering you, Amaris." He sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "And here is what I am not." She waited. "I am not offering to save you. I am not going to walk into a federal building and hand this folder to an agent with your name on the cover sheet. That would end your husband. It would also end you, and it would end your foundation, and it would take with it the 6 real programs your foundation actually funds, which serve, by my count, 1,200 children." Her throat closed. "What I am offering," he continued, "is information, legal introductions, a forensic accountant named Maricela Kwan, who is the best in the Midwest, and who owes me a favor she has been trying to repay for 3 years. A criminal defense attorney named Thaddeus Okafor, who does not lose. And, if you want it, protection. Because the moment you move against Denton, Boaz Whitmer will hear about it within 48 hours. And Boaz Whitmer is not a man who tolerates loose ends. Protection meaning what? Meaning Yunseo will drive you anywhere you need to go for the next 90 days. Meaning I will personally be a call away. Meaning the 2 men outside this building right now will continue to be outside any building you are inside of." She hadn't seen the 2 men. Of course she hadn't. "What do you want in return?" Kaeson leaned back. "I want the wire transfer records from inside the foundation. The ones only a signing officer can pull without triggering an audit flag. I want them handed to a specific U.S. attorney I trust, on a specific Tuesday, in a specific way. And I want your name on the whistleblower filing, not mine. Because if it comes from me, it looks like a rival move. If it comes from you, it looks like what it is." "Which is?" "A woman refusing to be the face of a lie any longer." Amara stared at him. "What are the risks?" she said slowly. "You are not telling me?" He respected her enough not to sugarcoat it. "Denton may try to have you declared mentally unwell to seize control of the foundation. He will almost certainly file for divorce first, on grounds designed to make you unhireable. Vivian Beaumont will spend approximately $800,000 trying to destroy your reputation in the Tribune. Boaz Whitmer may try to do something worse. There is a non-zero chance that someone I love will be hurt because of what we are about to do together. That someone right now includes you. And the reward? You get your name back," Kaeson said. "You get to look at yourself in a mirror. You get to build something with your own hands that no one can put another man's plaque on." Her tea had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. "And you and I?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not hunger, not the flat want she'd learned to brace for from powerful men. Something quieter, something like recognition. "You and I," he said, "are not a negotiation. You do this whether or not you ever want to see my face again. If you want to see my face again, that is a conversation we will have on a night that is not this one." She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table, opened the leather folder and picked up the pen. She filed the whistleblower complaint on a Tuesday in March, exactly as Kaeson had said she would. The morning of, she wore the same navy suit her mother had bought her for her Northwestern graduation. It still fit. She had walked into the Everett M. Dirksen Federal Building at 8:47 a.m., flanked by Thaddeus Okafor and Maricela Kwan, and had spent 4 hours in a windowless room speaking calmly, precisely, into a recorder. She named Denton Beaumont. She named Eleanor Voss. She named Halston Educational Trust, and the warehouse address in Gary, and the 7 wire transfers she had, without knowing what she was doing, authorized as a signing officer of the Beaumont Foundation. She did not cry. She had done her crying in Kaeson's kitchen, and then again, alone, in the shower of the apartment on West Erie Street that had become, without either of them naming it, her home. She had moved out of the brownstone 12 days before. She had packed 1 suitcase, her mother's ironing pattern still folded in the lining, and left the 2-carat oval on Denton's nightstand with a note that said only, "You should have said my name." Denton found out about the complaint at 3:15 that afternoon. By 3:52, he had called her 17 times. By 4:30, he had called her mother. By 6 o'clock, Vivian Beaumont had sent a courier to West Erie Street with a handwritten letter accusing Amaris of being disturbed, ungrateful, and racially opportunistic, whatever the last one was supposed to mean. Amaris read the letter once. Then she folded it into quarters and put it in the folder Thaddeus had labeled Evidence of Harassment. By 8 p.m., Denton was at the front door of the building. Yunseo did not let him pass the lobby. "Amaris," Denton said into the intercom, and his voice was doing the thing it always did when he wanted to be believed. The small crack at the end of her name, the vulnerability he had trained like a dog. "Baby, please, I don't know what they told you, but you and we built this together. You're going to burn down our life over a misunderstanding?" She stood in the hallway outside her apartment door and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. "Denton," she said, and she was proud later of how quiet her voice was. "I planned that gala for 6 months. You told me I was throwing off the photos. Everything that happened after that, you handed me yourself." She hung up. She did not open the door. The next morning, at Thaddeus's advice, she filed for a protective order and for divorce, and she filed both before Denton's lawyers had finished their coffee. The story broke in the Tribune 9 days later, above the fold. Beaumont Foundation under federal investigation, chairman's estranged wife cooperating. The word estranged did something to her chest. It made her reel. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, because we are getting to the part where the woman who used to iron collars flat becomes the woman who does not bend, do me a favor. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever set a boundary that made an entire family furious with you? Because Amaris is about to. And she'd like to know she's not the only one. The Beaumonts declared war on the 10th day. Vivian granted an interview to a society magazine in which she described Amaris as a young woman from an unfortunate background who married above her ability to cope. Eleonora Voss filed a defamation countersuit that Thaddeus laughed at, actually laughed, for a full 30 seconds. Denton's team subpoenaed the Foundation's records, then discovered, to their horror, that Maricela Kwan had already indexed, time-stamped, and mirrored every one of them onto 3 separate encrypted servers before they'd finished breakfast. And on the 14th day after the complaint was filed, at 6:12 a.m., federal agents walked into the Beaumont brownstone in Lincoln Park with a warrant, a battering ram they did not need, and a list of names. Amaris was not there to see it. She was on the roof of the building on West Erie Street, wrapped in a wool coat, watching the sun come up over Lake Michigan for the first time in 3 years without a knot in her stomach. Kaeson brought her coffee. He did not say anything. He just stood beside her, his shoulder a careful 3 inches from hers, and they watched the light move across the water. The trial did not happen the way trials do on television. It happened slowly, in filings and depositions, over the course of 11 months. Denton Beaumont's attorneys tried, in order, denial, deflection, blaming Eleonora, blaming Amaris, blaming a rogue accountant no one had ever met, and finally, a plea deal. He took 84 months in federal prison and a forfeiture of $3.2 million in assets, including the brownstone. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in February, in a courtroom paneled in dark walnut that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Amaris sat in the second row. She wore a burgundy suit. Her mother, Odessa, sat on her right, holding her hand so tightly that both their palms were slick by the time the judge sat down. Kaeson Rhee sat 3 rows back in a plain black overcoat and did not once look toward the front. He had told her on the drive down, "This is your room. I'll be in it." "I will not be of it." The prosecutor read the statement of facts. Amaris was invited to give a victim impact statement. Thaddeus had drafted 3. She had rewritten all of them. What she said in the end was her own. "Your Honor," she began, and her voice did not shake. "For 3 years I was told I was a wife. I was, in truth, a signature. My name was used to make crimes look like charity. My face was used to make theft look like generosity. And the man who did this to me was, for a long time, the man I woke up next to." She looked at Denton. He would not look back. "I do not want him to be sorry, Your Honor. Sorry is for people who did not know what they were doing. Denton Beaumont knew every single thing he was doing. I want him to be exactly as accountable as the law will make him, and then I want to go home to a life that no longer has his name in it." She sat down. Denton got the 84 months. Eleanora Voss took a separate plea for 36. Vivian Beaumont, who had done nothing legally prosecutable, but had spent 6 months trying to have Amaris publicly destroyed, was invited to resign from the boards of 3 museums, 2 hospitals, and 1 country club, and was seen the following spring at a garden party in Lake Forest wearing sunglasses indoors. On the courthouse steps, a reporter from the Tribune asked Amaris what she wanted to say to other women watching. She thought about it for a long moment. The February wind pulled at the collar of her coat. "I want to say," she said, "that the loneliest place in the world is standing next to a man who has decided you are furniture, and that walking away from that pillar was not the bravest thing I did. Filing the paperwork was. Signing my own name was. Refusing to disappear so that his life could stay comfortable. That was." The clip ran on the local news for a week. She watched it once, in her mother's living room in Gary, sitting on the same couch where she had done her college applications. Odessa reached over and pressed her palm flat against Amaris's collar, the way she used to before an iron ever touched it. "You're not wrinkled, baby," she said. "You're not wrinkled at all." 6 weeks after the sentencing, Vivian Beaumont came to see her. It was April. Amaris had just finished a meeting on the 7th floor of a small office building on West Erie Street, where the newly formed Odessa Beaumont Literacy Fund. She had kept the last name and put her mother's first name in front of it, and if Vivian wanted to fight her over that, Vivian could try, had its 2-room headquarters. Vivian was waiting in the lobby in a camel coat, with her hands folded like a woman at a funeral. "May I have 10 minutes?" Vivian said. Not a question. Amaris took her upstairs. She poured her a glass of water. She did not offer coffee. "You are ruining this family," Vivian began. Amaris waited. "Denton is a good man who made a mistake. He is in a cage, Amaris. He is in a cage, and his brother has stopped speaking to me, and Harlan has not slept through the night in 4 months, and the boy—" Her voice caught, and Amaris was almost impressed by how convincing it sounded. "The boy needs his wife to come and see him. He needs to hear from you that this can be mended." "His wife," Amaris said, "signed divorce papers 11 months ago. His wife's last name changes back on Friday." "Amaris?" Vivian leaned forward. The performance of tenderness was almost complete. "You would not have what you have if it were not for us. Northwestern would not have you spoken of the way they now speak of you. The foundation. The foundation is called something else now. You were nothing before Denton." There it was. Amaris let the silence sit between them for a long moment. She thought about Odessa, ironing collars flat. She thought about her 25-year-old self, presenting a pitch deck she had built with her own 2 hands to a room full of people whose approval she had once needed. She thought about the woman at the pillar. Then she said quietly, "Mrs. Beaumont, I was Amaris before Denton. I was Amaris during Denton. I am Amaris after Denton. The only thing that ever changed was who was willing to say my name." Vivian's mouth tightened. "You are throwing away a life." "No, ma'am. I am building one. What you're watching is the part where I stop asking permission. He will be out in 6 years. Then he will be out, and I will not be waiting." Vivian stood. She smoothed the front of her camel coat with the careful, angry precision of a woman who had never in her life been told no by someone she considered beneath her. "You will regret this, girl." Amaris walked her to the door. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I only regret the years I spent trying to be somebody's dear." She closed the door. She stood with her hand flat against the wood for a full 30 seconds, breathing. She did not cry. She had done that work, and it was finished. Then she went back to her desk and answered the next email. The Odessa Beaumont Literacy Fund closed its first fiscal year with $4.1 million raised, 91% of which went directly to programming, a ratio that made 3 larger nonprofits in the city quietly furious. The fund served 2,300 children across 9 schools on the south and west sides. Amaris hired 7 full-time staff, all of them women. 6 of them were black. One of them, a soft-spoken program director named June-Hee Park, had grown up in Albany Park and had emailed Amaris a single line in her application. "I was one of these kids. Let me be one of these adults." Amaris hired her the day the application came in. She was, that spring, invited to speak at Northwestern's Kellogg School, the same school whose graduation suit she had worn to the federal building on a Tuesday in March, about ethical fundraising and nonprofit governance. She was paid an honorarium of $6,000 for the lecture. It was the first check she had ever received made out to Amaris Larkin. The Larkin was her mother's maiden name, and she had taken it back on the same Friday she had shed the Beaumont, and she did not cash it. She framed it. She bought her mother a house. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in Miller Beach in Gary, with a small back garden and a screened porch that looked toward the lake. Odessa had cried when she saw it, standing in the doorway with her keys in her fist, and had said only, "Baby, baby, baby." Amaris had bought it in cash, in her own name, from money she had earned in 18 months of consulting on the side while she built the fund. She had not accepted a dime from Kaeson Rhee. She had not asked for it, and he had not offered. That, more than anything, was the thing she came back to at night. He had never once tried to buy her. The June after the sentencing, the fund received its first major institutional grant, $900,000 from the MacArthur Foundation, unrestricted over 3 years. The email arrived at 10:47 on a Wednesday morning. Amaris read it twice, sitting alone in her office. Then she walked to the window that overlooked the alley behind West Erie Street and put both hands flat against the glass and laughed, once, a full-bodied sound she did not remember making since she was maybe 22 years old. She had done this. Not Denton, not Vivian, not even Kaeson. Her. With her name on the door and her mother's name on the wall and her own 2 hands on the wheel, she called Odessa first. She called Kaeson second. He met her on the roof of the West Erie Street building that night. It was warm for June. The sky over Lake Michigan was the color of a bruise healing. "You didn't ask me to come," he said. "I know." "You called me anyway." "I know." He waited. Kaeson Rhee had, she had learned over 18 months, the patience of a man who had spent his life negotiating with people who did not want to be negotiated with. He never filled her silences. He let her use them. "When you took my hand at the Gala," Amaris said, watching a barge move slowly north on the lake, "I thought you were the thing that was going to save me. I know you did. I was wrong. I know you were." She turned to look at him. He was leaning on the parapet, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the crescent moon scar on his knuckle catching the last of the light. He was, she realized with a small quiet shock, the most familiar face in her life. "I want to say something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish it." He nodded. "I know who you are. I know what you run. I have not asked you the questions I have not asked you because I did not want to know the answers, on days when the answers would have made it harder to accept your help. That was cowardice. I want to stop being a coward." He waited. "I am not going to be a woman who lives inside a man's world again. Not yours. Not anyone's. I have my own building. I have my own name on my own door. If you and I are going to be anything, it will be 2 people who meet in the middle. It will be honest. It will not be secret. And there will be things you do that I will not be a part of. And there will be things I do that you will not be a part of. And we will both have to be grown enough to let each other be." She stopped. Kaeson was quiet for a long time. "There are things," he said finally, "that I have been considering stepping away from. Not because of you, because of me. Because I am tired, Amaris, in a way I did not know I could be tired." A small breath. "I would like to tell you about them, slowly, over the kind of time it takes to trust someone." "How long does that take?" she asked. He almost smiled. "I don't know. I have never done it before." "Neither have I," she said. "Not really." He reached out, he took her hand. The same hand he had taken at the pillar, in a ballroom, 18 months ago. This time, she took his bag. The question I asked you at the beginning was, what is the price of being chosen if the man doing the choosing owns half the shadows in the city? The answer, in Amaris Larkin's case, was this. The price was learning she never needed to be chosen at all. Not by Denton, who had used her name as a coat of paint over a crime. Not by Vivian, who had confused her lineage with her worth. Not even by Kaeson Rhee, who had, to his credit, never once asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. The night a stranger took her hand at a gala, she thought she was being rescued. She was not being rescued. She was being introduced to a version of herself who had been standing quietly inside her for 29 years, waiting for someone, anyone, to say her name out loud so she could remember it. Kaeson said it, but she was the one who kept saying it after. She built the fund. She bought the house. She framed the first check. She stood on the courthouse steps and did not disappear. She held a boundary against a woman in a camel coat. She took a man's hand on a rooftop as a partner, not a project. She did not get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back. If this story moved you, do one last thing for me. Comment the word Amaris below so I know you made it to the end. Share this with the woman in your life who has been standing quietly by a pillar, waiting to be seen. And subscribe, because next week we are telling the story of a woman who walked into her own wedding rehearsal and walked out with a different last name. Until then, don't help the world wrinkle you.